The talk you are about to hear is by Sensei Richard von Sturmer. With our teisho this morning, Sunday the 6th of January, the third day of our session, we'll continue to read from Ichi Tantei Uno, a collection of talks by Tangen Roshi. Before we get into his talks, at the back of the book there are a number of recollections, reminiscences by students who have worked with Tangen Roshi at Bukkokuji. And a number of them are people who we know from Rochester. So I'll just read two. This one's entitled The Culprit by Jiku-san. It happened during Gyocha, the tea ceremony held every fourth day. We all had our okashi and our bowl of matcha, green tea, prepared to hear Roshi-sama's talk. There was a long silence, suddenly broken by Roshi-sama's voice in an unusual tone. He said that this morning, before the tea ceremony, he had found a rather precious ceramic bowl broken in the founder's room, the pieces scattered on the floor. We were admonished that if something like this happened, the person who did it should report it, adding that, as all the residents gathered at the tea ceremony, whoever did it had to be there. So please, raise your hand. There would be no reprimand at all. It's just a matter of sincerity. There was an intense silence that seemed very long. When the climax was about to be reached, a cat sprang out of a nearby room, stood in the middle of the tea ceremony room, stared at Roshi-sama and did a loud shriek, and immediately ran out into the garden. The general amazement was broken by Roshi-sama's solemn voice saying, "Oh, so desu." Is that so? This reminds me of a story that Ajahn Brahm, a Thai teacher, tells. Ajahn Brahm, originally from England, he is ordained in the lineage of Ajahn Chah, the great Thai teacher, and he has a retreat centre outside Perth in the countryside in Western Australia, and spent a long time constructing his centre, and he was practical. He learned all sorts of skills to help build the centre. Anyway, he says, we all make mistakes from time to time. Life is about learning to make our mistakes less often. To realize this goal, we have a policy in our monastery that monks are allowed to make mistakes. When the monks are not afraid to make mistakes, they don't make so many. While walking through my monastery grounds one day, I found a hammer left out in the grass. It had obviously been there a long time, for it was already getting rusty. I was very disappointed at the carelessness of my fellow monks. So I called a meeting of the monks. I told them that my character is usually as soft as mushy peas, but that evening I was fierce as Thai chili. I gave the monks a tongue lashing. They needed to be taught a lesson and learn to look after the few possessions we have. When I completed my harangue, all the monks were sitting bolt upright, ashen-faced, and silent and waiting. I waited a while, expecting the culprit to confess, but none of the monks did. I felt very disillusioned with my fellow monks as I got up to walk out of the hall. At the very least, I would have thought the monk responsible for leaving the hammer out in the grass would have had the guts to confess and apologize. Perhaps my talk was too harsh. As I walked out of the hall, I suddenly realized why none of the monks had admitted responsibility. I turned round and went back inside the hall. "Monks," I announced, "I've found out who left the hammer out in the grass. It was me." I'd clean forgotten that it was I who'd been working outside and, in haste, had failed to put the hammer away. Even during my fiery talk, the memory had eluded me. Only after telling all my monks off did it all come back to me. It was I who had done it. Oh, that was embarrassing. Fortunately, we're allowed to make mistakes in my monastery, even the abbot. And just sitting before teisho, I had a memory come up. When I was training at the Rochester Zen Center, I did many sessions as timer. And during one session, Sevan Ross, who was second monitor, was sitting beside me. And I did something unusual, something strange. And so during the monitors meeting, Sevan said to my teacher, Tangen Roshi, I'd done this thing, I'd done this mistake, and he should be told about it. And my teacher, Roshi Bowden, said, "Oh no, he won't do it again. And Sevan said, "You want to bet? I bet a Tootsie Roll that he will." Tootsie Roll is like a chocolate roll in America. I bet a Tootsie Roll that he will. But I never made the mistake again. So Sevan lost his Tootsie Roll. And to this day, I don't know what my mistake was. I've got no idea. So sometimes you make mistakes and that you don't even know about. Okay, so we'll get back to Tangen Roshi's talks. This one's called Four Views of Water. Everyone is living in his own world. Look at four views of water. The same water. The fish live in it freely, while we humans receive it as water to drink, water that's necessary to sustain life. Fall into the hungry ghost realm, and water is fire, from the cause of envy and hatred. For an inhabitant of the heavenly realm, water is a jewel. The nature of water does not change. It's always the same. But we're bringing our stuff with us, so we each see the same water differently, this great Dharma water. At its roots, life is absolute equality. Buddhists do not have more of it than ordinary beings. Each and every being is the master of this great Dharma water. But out of 10 million people, there will be 10 million ways of receiving. Knowing this, we know that we must walk the path, ask the way, the true way, and hear that your life is the source, that your life as it is perfectly precious. So we have ideas about things, people have opinions, we hold views, and often they just obscure what the truth is, what the true way is. So for Zen students, to see things clearly, not to become deluded, is the imperative. That's why we're at Sesshin, to turn our gaze inwards and see into our true nature. There's a story about collective delusion by Paulo Coelho, who's a Brazilian writer, and it's very relevant today with the collective delusion in the United States, where past critics of Trump now wholeheartedly endorse him. And many of his supporters, and this has been reported, many of his supporters acknowledge what a dreadful person he is, but they still vote for him. It's like they're being sucked into his lies and his delusions. So this is the story. A powerful wizard who wanted to destroy an entire kingdom placed a magic potion in the well from which all the inhabitants drank. Whoever drank that water would go mad. The following morning, the whole population drank from the well, and they all went mad, apart from the king and his family, who had a well set aside for them alone, which the magician had not managed to poison. The king was worried and tried to control the population by issuing a series of edicts governing security and public health. The policemen and the inspectors, however, had also drunk from the poisoned well, and they thought the king's decisions were absurd and resolved to take no notice of them. When the inhabitants of the kingdom heard these decrees, they became convinced that the king had gone mad and was now giving nonsensical orders. This sort of has echoes of the COVID situation and the non-vaxxers. Anyway, I'll go on. When the inhabitants of the kingdom heard these decrees, they became convinced that the king had gone mad and was now giving nonsensical orders. They marched to the castle and called for his abdication. They raised their placards outside of Parliament. In despair, the king prepared to step down from the throne, but the queen stopped him, saying, "Let us go and drink from the communal well. Then we will be the same as them." And that was what they did. The king and the queen drank the waters of madness, and immediately they began talking nonsense. Their subjects repented at once. Now the king was displaying such wisdom. Why not allow him to continue ruling the country? The country continued to live in peace, although its inhabitants behaved very differently from those of its neighbours, and the king was able to govern until the end of his days. There's a little story on the power of collective delusion. Of the three poisons, greed, anger, and delusion, delusion often takes a back seat. Greed and anger are more upfront and clearly defined. But it does feel like we have entered an age of delusion, of false truth and brazen lies. More than ever, we need to see things clearly and act with wisdom and compassion. That's what we're compelled to do as people on the way, to see things clearly and act with wisdom and compassion. Next talk, a short one stone. The most important part of the mountain is its top, its peak. Is the most important part of the mountain its top, its peak? No, the smallest, tiniest little rock at the foot of the mountain quietly supports that peak. Thanks to one stone, each one stone, the mountain reveals itself, bracing and magnificent. Were it not for that one tiny stone, for each stone at the base, that precious peak would not stand. That's a great way of seeing a vast, impressive mountain by studying the stones at its base, each of the stones that supports the mountain. And each moment of attention, of being completely absorbed in our practice, adds to Sesshin as a whole. No matter what day of Sesshin, we're all of us, we're building Sesshin breath by breath. And thinking of breath, next one is breathing this one breath is a miracle. Tangen Roshi says, I was at the hospital this morning visiting someone in a very serious condition. Up until just a short while ago, a month ago, he was a fine, strong, healthy person. He suddenly became ill and had surgery, and now it looks like he might not make it. I went to the hospital to breathe quietly with him. I went to the hospital to breathe quietly with him. That's a really good practice if we know someone, we visit them at hospital and they're in a serious condition, maybe not even conscious, then just to sit with them and just to breathe quietly with that person can be a great help. He continues, every one of you is breathing this one breath. To be breathing this one breath is a miracle not easily come by. Life. The only way to live in certainty without anxiety is to awaken to the truth, and then you will be a person of eternal life. You can awaken to deathlessness, transcend death. Then, for the first time, you will understand how precious, how perfect is each raindrop that falls from the sky, how filled with compassion is each raindrop, the compassion of all being, the fruit of all being. A single clear raindrop is the jewel, the gem, the crystallization of all life, all being, all warmth. Each of us now is living out of this warmth and kindness and compassion every instant, but we are not aware of it. This man in intensive care is receiving last-ditch treatment. A machine is giving him this breath. Breathing this one breath is a miracle. Sometimes, whatever we take for granted, we are assuming to be of no value. How utterly mistaken. We are all here dedicating ourselves to one practice. Today is the last day I have to live. Practice this way, will you? There is someone here who is so dedicated. As a result, how differently he is seeing and hearing and receiving. The genuine is so close. You are being urged from every direction to awaken to life. Don't you see it yet? Not yet? With what energy and determination does life demand, urge, press you to awaken? Just this practice. Do this one doing. This one doing is the truth. That's Ichi Tantei, just doing. The next talk. What happened after death? At a death memorial service recently, an old woman who was not well, herself, having already had stomach surgery, approached me with this question: what happens after death? Death is not somebody else's problem. Death is the fact of this world. You yourself will die. In answer to her question, what happens when you die? I answered, absolutely nothing happens. She looked very surprised. Absolutely nothing happens? There is nothing which is not yourself. This absolutely nothing happens may sound harsh when this woman was asked, probably wanting some reassurance of maybe a life after or the Buddha's assistance, but Tangen Roshi tells it as it is. And this is, of course, this is from the perspective of the small self. Absolutely nothing happens. Because, in regards to the bigger self, our true nature, there is nothing which is not yourself. And he goes on, it is the same as when you are alive. Nothing changes. We are so quick to look away from that, what is, so quick to look away from this instant, from this life, on through countless lives. The evidence that you are alive is this day, today, now. From this day on, throughout countless tomorrows, from this life on, throughout countless lives to come. What happened when yesterday ends? This is probably no one who worries about yesterday ending, or today. What happens when today ends? Do you try to hang on to this life, this day? When this day life ends, what happens with tomorrow's life? What happens when I meet the death of this life? Absolutely nothing. Everyone is trying so desperately to hang on to this. You cannot grasp it. You cannot hold on to it. You labor under the false illusion that this day, this life is fixed, somehow static. It is the habit of misseeing. You falsely perceive an I, me, mine. You grasp, you hold on to a me. It's your habit because you're grasping. You're grasping at the notion of a fixed, permanent self. He goes on. Actually, no, we'll stop there. You're grasping at the notion of a fixed, permanent self. In regards to the woman's question, what happens when you die? Anne Aiken, who was the wife of Robert Aiken Roshi, she was asked the same question when she was old. What happens when you die? And Anne Aiken said, it's like waiting at a bus stop. The bus arrives, you get on, and the bus drives away. That's it. The bus arrives, you get on, and the bus drives away. And Ryokan, the great Zen monk and poet, he had this verse. When a painful day is met, the painful day is met with welcome. At the time of death, death is met with welcome. Tangen continues, there is nowhere any such fixed, static self. You are trying to hold on to a phantom. Where did it go? What happened to it? But our prayer is this: I vow, with all beings from this life on through countless lives, to hear the Dharma. and upon hearing it, no doubt will arise, nor will I lack in faith. True Dharma, this is your true self. This is your true self. Oh, I just realized that I was going to tell two reminiscences about Tangen Roshi. So I'll read the second one now. This is from part of Bukkokuji in the 80s, and it's by Mala Roshi's teacher, Tangen Roshi, when he was a priest visiting Bukkokuji in the 80s. It's about the kyosaku, the encouragement stick. At Bukkokuji, sesshin with the kyosaku was used noticeably less than it was in Rochester at the time, and drastically less compared to Rochester sesshin in the 70s, 1970s. You could say that in the 70s, the stick was used excessively from one perspective. Sometimes both monitors would get up together during a round and whack, 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 everyone really hard. So you'd have two monitors going around the zendo, so you'd get whacked maybe 4 times or more, really hard. But that wasn't the case at Bukkokuji. Tangen Roshi goes on. Accounts in the 3 pillars of Zen suggest that the stick may have been heaviest of all when Kaplo-san was at Hoshinji, that's that temple above Bukkokuji, when Tangen-san was the head monk. When I marveled at this change of stick culture from that of Tangen-san in the 1950s to Tangen Roshi in 1985, Tangen Roshi explained, when Harada Shogaku Roshi died, the training at Hoshinji fell apart. I realized that it was because the discipline was all from the outside. Now I think that the discipline should come from the inside. I used to hit the monks terrifically hard with the kyosaku, but now I hit like a baby. That's very much Tangen Roshi. Of course, he doesn't hit like a baby, but he says, now I hit like a baby. So he makes an important point that you can't rely on the heavy use of the stick or a strict teacher. Ultimately, your Zen discipline has to come from within. Has to come from within. So that from what I remember when we visited Bukkokuji, the hitting was fairly similar to the way we hit here, just as encouragement, to give encouragement. And that's what the stick should be used for. However, having said that, the early years of my training, going to Rochester from New Zealand, I used to go on Continental Airlines, which has disappeared, and they'd stop at Hawaii. So I'd always stop at Hawaii for a few days in Honolulu. It was a great break. And I got to know a Zen priest, Craig Colfar Twentyman, who was originally from Rochester, but he was training with Tangen Roshi. He'd go to sesshin with Tangen 5 or 6 times a year, and he'd been doing that for many years, and he got to know Tangen Roshi really well. And he told me about one teisho, an extraordinary teisho that Tangen Roshi gave. There are a lot of old-timers present, a lot of Westerners present. And for teisho, Tangen Roshi just got up walked slowly around the zendo, stood behind each person. They were all facing the wall. Stood behind each person and told them what they lacked in their practice. Each person, their particular weak point. So they'd stand behind someone and say, you're just so caught up in worries about getting sick and falling ill and health issues, and then, throw it away or whatever, and then he'd get them, whack, whack, and it'd go around to the next person, stand behind them and say, you just have so much lack of faith, you really need to develop faith or whatever, and then whack, whack, and it'd go to the next person and say, you're lazy, you never fully commit to your practice, you never give it 100%, whack, whack, and it'd go to the next person, and it just continues slowly around the zendo and around, telling each person what they needed to hear. That was the teisho. And Craig told me it was the most magnificent teisho that he'd ever heard or experienced. So that was another side of Tangen Roshi. And for all I know, that was the only time that he ever gave such a teisho. Okay, the next section, you are the master of the house of the Buddha. Tangen says, how does the house of Buddha look? The sky is clear and the sun appears. Rain falls and earth is moistened. Everything is explained without restraint. Yet how few of you are able to catch it. When it does become apparent, you will finally understand that there was never any need to be confused, looking off, armed with your own perspective. Never any need to go in search of the house of the Buddha. I remember when one Doksan that I did with Tangen Roshi, and I came to him and I had the usual complaint about how could I get fully engaged with my practice, how could I go deeper? And he just said to me, he smiled, and he just said, throw yourself into the house of the Buddha. And it was just wonderful to be in his presence and receive that teaching. He goes on, throw mind and Buddha, throw mind and body into the house of the Buddha. These words sound so simple, the house of Buddha. But where is the house of Buddha? Do you look off? Do you search elsewhere? You are, as you are now, here, the master of the house of the Buddha. The territory is so very familiar. It is your every moment, the house of Buddha. Even in the greatest trembling of the earth, the greatest quake, this house doesn't budge an inch. To describe it still more stringently, the explosion of all the atomic bombs created by selfish, self-serving human beings would fail to trouble this truth. Not troubled, not harmed. There's a beautiful verse by Keizan, Dogen's grandson in the Dharma, that goes like this: even though the myriad things are extinguished, there remains something that is not extinguished. Even though everything is gone, there is something that is not extinguished. Even in the greatest trembling of the earthquake. I read an article by Leonard Cohen, who was a student of Sasaki Roshi, and Leonard Cohen was sitting in the Doksan line during the 1994 Los Angeles earthquake. He was in Los Angeles in the Doksan line, and this was a tremendous earthquake, and the whole building was shaking and shaking, and everyone in the Doksan line was just unmoving. He said it was so inspiring. No one moved an inch. They were just in the Doksan line. Unfortunately, nothing happened to their zendo. Tangen Roshi continues. There is nothing to let go of. Just release. Let go of that stingy, grasping tendency, your habit. Body and mind dropped, forgotten. Let go. Everything is let go. Set free. Nothing lingers. Dropping everything may be an uncomfortable thought. That's just a thought. Please, for once, let everything drop away. The hand, the foot, the eye, the ear, the head. Be empty as you are, empty. Body and mind dropped, forgotten. When you drop body and mind, forget about them and throw yourself into the house of the Buddha. Then all is done by Buddha. You are in accord with Buddha. You are free from birth and death. You become a Buddha without effort or calculation. Although at the time, I didn't know it, but throw yourself into the house of the Buddha is a teaching of Dogen. The wonderful thing with Tangen Roshi is that his teisho, his talks, just flowed from him. As far as I can perceive, he didn't rely on set texts. They were just spontaneously coming forth from him. But as far as I know, the only Zen teacher from the past that he would quote and draw upon was Eihei Dogen. And so throw yourself into the house of the Buddha comes from shoji, birth and death, which is the shortest fascicle in Dogen's Shobogenzo. So I just want to read a little bit from shoji. Can be translated as birth and death or birth and life. And Dogen says, to seek Buddha apart from birth and death is like pointing the shafts of a cart northward when you want to go south, or facing south to see the northern dipper. It only furthers the condition of birth and death and deprives you all the more of the way of deliverance. Just understand that birth and death is itself nirvana, and you will neither hate one as being birth and death, nor cherish the other as being nirvana. Only then can you be free from this birth and death. It is a mistake to think that you pass from life to death. Being one stage of time, life is possessed of before and after. For this reason, the Buddha Dharma teaches that life itself is as such unborn. Being one stage of time as well, cessation of life also is possessed of before and after. Thus is it said that extinction itself is undying. When there is life, there is nothing at all apart from life. When there is death, there is nothing at all apart from death. That's the real nub, the really profound point. That's when Tangen Roshi replied to the old woman about her question, what happens when you die? And he said, nothing. When there is life, there is nothing at all apart from life. When there is death, there is nothing at all apart from death. Therefore, when life comes, you should give yourself to life. And when death comes, you should give yourself to death. As Ryokan says in his verse, you should neither desire them nor hate them. Your present birth and death itself is the life of Buddha. If you attempt to reject it with aversion, you thereby lose the life of Buddha. If you abide in it, attaching to birth and death, you also lose the life of Buddha and are left with only its outward appearance. You attain the mind of Buddha only when there is no hating of birth and death and no desiring of nirvana. But do not try to measure it with your mind or explain it with words. When you let go of both your body and mind, forget both and throw yourself into the house of Buddha. And when functioning begins from the side of Buddha, drawing you into accord with it, then, with no need for any expenditure of either physical or mental effort, you are freed from birth and death and become Buddha. Then there can be no obstacle in anyone's mind. There is an extremely easy way to become Buddha. If you refrain from all evil, do not cling to birth and death, work in deep compassion for all sentient beings, respecting those above you and showing compassion for those below you, without detesting or desiring worry or lamentation. That is Buddhahood. Do not search beyond it. So Buddha Dogen here, in this last paragraph, where he gives instruction, he's just reinforcing the precepts, and especially the first three precepts, the refuges, and also, I vow to do good, I vow to refrain from evil, I vow to liberate all sentient beings. It's just that. Without desiring or detesting. Again, not getting caught up in the two major causes of suffering, desire and hatred or anger, greed or hatred, not getting caught up in any of those two. That's the way to liberation. With this refraining from evil, from doing good, and saving all sentient beings, with that in mind, then that's it. Do not search beyond it. So, for everyone in this sesshin, we can heed Dogen and Tangen's words. Throw yourself into the house of the Buddha. Throw yourself into the house of the Buddha means doing everything wholeheartedly. This is especially true of sesshin. Not expecting results, not thinking that you'll be more concentrated on day 5 or day 6 of sesshin. Everything you need is right here and right now. For the monitor, each whack of the stick is just this, an opportunity to be fully concentrated with nothing outside. For the timer, each strike of the bell, it's just this. The whole world of sesshin is that one bell strike. For people working in the kitchen, just the chopping, just the stirring of the pot. Don't think that concentrated practice is only in the zendo. It's in every moment of sesshin. Dogen says, do not search beyond it. Your koan is right with you, 100%. Your breath is right here, breathing in, breathing out. Just sitting, fully present, is an expression of your true nature. Let everything else fall away. Let everything else fall away. Just this practice from here on to the end of Sesshin. We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows.
The teaching you have received is offered freely. If you would like to make a donation to support the continuation of this podcast service or learn more about practice opportunities at the Auckland Zen Centre, please visit www.aucklandzen.org.nz.